Well, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could come this morning. The purpose of this meeting is to prepare for our Strategic Planning Summit, which occurs on April 10th. We've done a lot of work in assessing where we are as an institution. Mike Bowman, who's the Executive Dean of Academic Affairs and Research and Planning, is going to be walking through the process and the assessments that we've done. But the purpose of this is a new kind of event, and it's designed to help you understand all of the assessments and the data and the analyses that we've done so that you can consider it in preparation for participating in the summit in April. So we want you to come in with some knowledge and some understanding and a shared understanding of the assessment and data that we've been looking at. So without saying more, want to go ahead, Mike?
I'll try and see how this works. I think I'll stand over to the side so I'm not glancing back and forth, but I can still see what I'm supposed to be talking about. So what we're really going to do today is look at data, look at what that means, talk about where all the data comes from, why it's important, how it all integrates into the planning process, so that when we go to the summit on April 10th, we'll have an idea of where we're starting and where we're going and what we really need to deal with. Because sometimes we get in those big meetings and all kind of peripheral issues come up and we're not as efficient as we could be. So just to remind you all of what we do in planning, on the left is a 5-year planning cycle, and we have a strategic plan that lasts for 5 years, and we 5 years ago set the goals for our 2010 to 2015 strategic plan. We have spent 5 years in the implementation of them, and of course we do annual kind of assessments of where we are to see how we're making progress year by year. But then in the 5-year planning cycle, we eventually come to that point where we look at our accomplishments over the past 5 years, evaluate those, see what new kinds of data, new kinds of trends have popped up, what we need to do, where some gaps are, what we should plan for the next 5 years. And so that's kind of the process we're in right now. And that assessment over here is kind of broken out so you can see the different things that go into it. Program reviews, accreditation reports, environmental scans, how we've done on our current goals and objectives, input from the college community and from the community at large. So we've done things like that, or in the midst of doing things like that. And all of that feeds into then an analysis of how well we've accomplished things, what haven't we accomplished, what emerging trends are that we need to focus on as we set our goals for the coming 5 years. So there are some rules for doing evidence-based planning, and that primarily is that the planning emerges from the data. So you look at the data, all the assessments we've done, from qualitative visiting with the community folks to an environmental scan that has 80 some odd pages of numbers for you to look at. And we put all this together and then see what the data tells us. When you do evidence-based planning, you aren't just saying, well, I'd really like to do something, or this is kind of the hobby horse I've been riding for the last several years, and nobody's addressed it, so I want to focus all my attention on doing this thing for my department. So evidence-based planning is really seeing what emerges from the data as our needs, and then kind of taking a college-wide view of things and trying to focus mostly on those strategic interventions or improvements that are college-wide. So that's kind of where we're going. This is a collaborative effort rather than a self-serving effort. So what are all the pieces that go into this process? Well, of course, we begin with mission, vision, and values. And as a part of the strategic planning process, you regularly look at and perhaps revise your mission statement or your values or your vision. And actually, there's a revised mission statement that's going to college council and moving through that process, revisions to the value statements. We also look at the various assessments, everything from program reviews and SLOs, environmental scans, everything that where we gather everything, that goes into it. We look at what recommendations have come out of things like equity plans and SSSP and technology plans and facilities plans and, of course, Ed Master plans. And what do we get from federal and statewide mandates? For instance, what has the Accreditation Commission said that we need to be doing? Or what is the Accreditation Commission doing to maybe revise its standards so that the ones we're evaluating ourselves against next time around are a little bit different? And so we plan ahead for those kinds of things. Also, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but there are also some new kind of federal and statewide mandates that are emerging that we need to be aware of. For instance, there's a statewide chancellor's office, institutional effectiveness, framework for goals and requirements that are going to be placed upon us, new requirements that will be placed upon us by the chancellor's office. There's a prospect of federal rating systems that will look at us, and coming out of that might be the prospect of performance-based funding. So all of these things are kind of emerging, and if they are going to, will have emerged within the next 5 years, and so we need to plan to be able to address those, even though they're not something that we're contending with right at the moment. And of course, one of the pieces is college-wide forum, and that's what we're going to do on April 10th when we gather in the gym and we get input from the entire college community. We have also had the President's Advisory Group that met last Monday, was it? Friday. It was one of those last weeks. And where we got input from the community at large. And so all of these pieces flow together to help us try and build a strategic plan. So far, we've drafted an environmental scan, an Ed Master Plan. We're reviewing the college mission statement. We've done the annual assessment of our goals for the last 5 years from that strategic plan. We've written equity plans and SSP. We've created a gap analysis. So the gap analysis is looking at what the data says, looking at where we think we would like to be, and seeing what's the gap between our current performance and where we'd like to be, or looking at new trends that are emerging, whether they be labor market trends or trends in federal mandates or education, whatever, and see, okay, are we at that level yet, or do we need to plan for that as well? And so these gaps are areas where we know we want to do some work, either for improvement or compliance or just because we need to. And of course, accreditation recommendations, actionable improvement plans where we said ourselves, here's what we want to do. Okay, now we need to make sure we do those kinds of things. So I'm presuming all but one of you in this room knows what an environmental scan is, and I'm just pretending that one of you doesn't, so I have a rationale for going through this particular slide. But an environmental scan is that compilation of all the data looking at the important aspects within the college, within the community, within the labor market, the economy, the qualitative data from what people say, and gathering all that together. And then in the analysis of that, that's where we come up with the gaps. Let's start with some of the interesting things that have emerged from the environmental scan. This is just a sample because with 80 pages I could go on forever and ever. But for instance, here's the things that the environmental scan reveals about us, our community. Almost 50% of our residents have a baccalaureate degree or higher, compared to the statewide average of only 30%. But what that means is the students that we get are going to come to us with expectations, and their parents are going to have expectations that for them, college is going to be an exceptional experience. It's going to be one where they are, college has always been a part of their plan for what they're going to do with their life. And so they are coming expecting not just an average experience, but they want an exceptional one because education is important. That's the culture they grew up in. And so we need to be responsive to that. Something that I discovered it was considerably higher than what I thought it would be. Almost 60% of Fremont residents don't have English as their first language. So that means, in addition to those highly qualified students that we are getting who come from that background, we may also be getting a number of first-generation students. Currently, 27% of our students are first generation. And so, you know, you're planning for that group of students who come, for whom parents are not making or have not made college, you know, a part of their family culture. And so we've got kind of both extremes sometimes. Of course, we also know that given our zip code where the college is located, we have a lot of non-English first language people for whom education is very important. So we've got, you know, the whole gamut of things. One thing here we need to keep in mind as we do our planning, because one of the things we have to plan for is growth, is that according to the Chancellor's Office, we're going to be one of the slowest growing college districts in California. What that will mean is we'll have a smaller pool of students to draw from, and in order to grow, we will need to find maybe innovative, different ways to promote that growth, whether it be increasing concurrent enrollment, whether it be finding programs that are tailored to older students, because by 2030, the number of residents in our district age 65 and over will double. So maybe we find some way to address that. But we know we will need to grow, and we also know that this is going to be one of the challenges. We're not going to be growing as fast as and won't be as capable of keeping up with the growth among other community college districts. Something from the labor market is that nearly 80% of all new jobs created in 2012 required an associate's degree or less. And yes, we are in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is San Mateo County, Santa Cruz County, Santa Clara County, and in Alameda, it only includes 3 cities, Fremont, Newark, and Union City. So we are the very northeastern tip of Silicon Valley. And we know that Silicon Valley is renowned for its you know, fantastic engineers and programmers and, you know, advanced degrees and all this sort of stuff. And some of our students will go from Ohlone to Cal or San Jose State and will become those kind of people. But we also know that one of the fastest growing job areas in Silicon Valley is for those who have technical skills, not necessarily a baccalaureate degree. There was a community college labor market workshop in Silicon Valley 2 days ago where it was pointed out that we will need 1 million new job market applicants who possess a bachelor's degree or higher, but we will also need 1 million more job applicants who have some college. And the way that they were defining some college is not just having attended occasionally, but attended long enough to get either an associate's degree or a CTE kind of certificate. And so we're in the business of doing both of those kinds of things. So we will serve that particular market that's growing considerably here in Silicon Valley. The environmental scan doesn't always point out the really good things we're doing. For instance, we know that we had a high enrolled academic year in 2008, 2009, and we've been in decline since then. However, we also know part of that decline was kind of mandated, workforce reductions and you know, budget cuts and things like that. And we can note that our fall 14 enrollment shows us a bump as we're heading back up in the right direction, and as growth is something that we can now pursue. But it will take us a while before we get back to the numbers we had in 2008, 2009. We also know that we're facing additional kinds of accountability measures from the Accrediting Commission, statewide rating system, the Student Success Scorecard, the potential for federal rating systems, the new institutional effectiveness mandates. So we know that accountability supported by data is going to be an ongoing and growing important part of who we are and what we do. So we've gotten really good at making decisions based on data. But the demand for that is going to be ever increasing. And that also means that once we get all that data out there, then we have to be able to learn how to analyze it and deal with it and make decisions based on it that are reasonable and wise. Here's a good something. In the past 5 years, the number of degrees we've awarded has increased over 60%. We are in the top 10% of the 112 community colleges on the scorecard metric of completions, which looks at degree completion and transfer. And so, you know, our reputation is a transfer reputation. Our reputation is a degree awarding kind of reputation. And so that's kind of what we do, who we are. That's not all we do, but that's what one of the things we're really good at. We're also really good at taking remedial students, that is students who begin in a basic skills class, either math or English, but we're a little better in math, but taking students who begin as basic skills students and helping them progress to the point where they pass a transfer level math or English course. We're fourth best in the state when it comes to math. In English, we're not far behind. We're still in the top 10 or 15% of colleges statewide. So we're really good at taking those students who come to us in what the Chancellor's Office refers to as unprepared and making them prepared and helping them through the whole process. Our success rate is better than the statewide average. Our students who transfer to the CSU, once they get there, get GPAs that are higher than the community college transfer average, that are higher than native CSU students for junior year grade point averages. And our students persist, that is, remain in the CSUs at a higher rate than the average or the native students. But we do have some gaps that we want to look at and address them. And so what we're doing in looking at all of these gaps is seeing, okay, is there a way that we take these shortcomings, maybe bunch them together so that we have goal topics, and then build goals and objectives in our strategic plan that will address these gaps. So here's some of the things we're looking at possibly integrating into the strategic plan when we end up writing that in April. We know there's a decline in evening and weekend sections. And if you just look at the numbers, you think, oh my goodness, what have we done wrong? But anytime you have numbers, you also have to have a context for that numbers. So for instance, our weekend enrollments, 2011 students declined to 394. Part of the reason for that is in 2008, 2009, we had a huge Chinese school enrollment on the weekends over at Fremont. Multiple sections generating, I don't know, 70 FTES or something like that. 70 FTES, full-time equivalent students. And as part of our having to cut the budget during the recession, our strategy was to try and keep as many classes as we could that were Monday through Friday, bread and butter classes, prime time. And so when we had to make reductions, one of the first places we had to cut classes were for electives, weekend classes, evening classes, because we wanted to keep those classes that would serve the widest array of students. And so, yes, evening and weekend classes suffered because of the recession. They're not where we'd like them to be, but perhaps part of our strategic plan will be to try and rebuild some of those enrollments. We also know, and the accreditation site visitors also pointed out, that our student services, or at least the possibility to access student services for evening, weekend, and online students is not at the same level where it is for students who attend in the daytime at Fremont or Newark. And so we see the numbers on the left of what the percent of students who access the services percent of all students is, and then we compare those to the sometimes significantly lower numbers on the right, and we're aware, obviously, through the data, although we knew it anecdotally, that we need to find a way to better provide the opportunities for access to student services for these three groups. So this will be a part of our strategic plan, we anticipate. Retention and persistence rates are below the statewide average. That's kind of been a characteristic for us. Although they are not, wildly below the averages, they are, and we have set for ourselves, kind of a task to see if we can improve retention and persistence rates. But again, there's a context for this. Sometimes we have faculty members who are just so thoughtful and so encouraging of student success that they see a student who's not faring well. We're getting close to the time where we can drop with a W, and we have a faculty member who would proactively drop that student rather than have them persist and get a D or an F or something like that. That's an honorable thing to do. Does terrible things to persistence rates, but on the other hand, we as a college need to decide, well, what is the best thing for us to do? And if the numbers don't stack up, maybe that's not a bad thing. But again, all of these things come in context. That was a retention rate, not persistence rates. Persistence is when the student goes to the next semester. And sometimes we have a lot of students who just don't seem to come back. But again, there may be reasons for that. We are in an area where opportunities for employment for students are relatively available. We have a number of students who come to us with the only goal of furthering their job skills, particularly in our CS and CNET majors or biotech majors or something like this, where they're fully employed, they come, they get whatever it is they need, and then they go back to the workplace, and they have no intention of completing or persisting. The same thing would be true with our large number of students who are in the Public Safety Consortium. These are everyday working police and firemen who come to the consortium, get whatever kinds of courses that may need to further their career, and then they're back on the job, and they don't intend on going semester after semester after semester, and those again will hamper our persistence rates, and we're aware of that. All the consortium, the students who are enrolled in the consortium are our students, and they're reported to the Chancellor's office when we do MIS. So yes, they're all in there, and yes, they have to be in there. And we then need to keep this in mind so that, when some of our numbers are low, we recognize we might be comparing apples to oranges. So again, we have to take the context, and sometimes the lower numbers might not, or maybe shouldn't even, disturb us. We've had a declining concurrent enrollment. That's the students that are enrolled while they were also in high school, they're enrolled in our college classes. Again, concurrent enrollment was an area that during the recession we cut back on. Now we have the prospects of building it up, and maybe even the rules for concurrent enrollment are changing, which would maybe make that a better avenue of growth to pursue, or not. But we did have a time when our concurrent enrollment was over 2,200. Last year was down to 1,400. This year it's about 1,550. So we are getting back to where we were. But as we do our planning, we need to decide, do we want to continue to grow? Do we want to aim for 2214 or above? Do we want to stay somewhere between those numbers? But we know we're going to have concurrent enrollment. It is a good thing for us to do for ourselves and for the community. We just need to plan on how we're going to do that. Part of our declining possibility for growth is also that our 7 district high schools are seeing declines in enrollment. They aren't overwhelming, but there's been this kind of trend of just slowly going down just a little bit. And of course, that probably has something to do with the fact that we're an aging district. You know, and we may not be having as many school-age children. Now, there seems to be a little bump in it for a while, and, you know, there'll be a time when that bump will make it to high school, and that'll be a good thing for us. But the trend has been that they have been declining. The graduation rates of our local high schools have gone up, so more of those high school students are graduating. But we also need to keep in mind that we've got 2 very high-performing high schools in our district, and for those students, many of them are fully intending that as soon as high school is over, they're going straight to university. And so we have very low enrollments at Ohlone from those 2 high schools. Another one of the gaps that we've identified is our CTE programs. Some of them, none of ours are irrelevant, but some of them are facing new challenges as the labor market and the demographics change. I've given you a couple of examples here. We've got a couple of departments for whom the program-related industries that are available out there are seeing remarkable growth. Yet our enrollments are declining at a time when you would think they'd be going up in response to the job market trends. But it could be they're declining because of the job market trends. Because, you know, we have a student who's going into some technical field, and all of a sudden there's a job out there that'll pay significant amounts of money and start a career, and that's what that person wanted to do anyway, so I'm on my way to a career. Another one of the kinds of conundrums we face is we know that we have some programs, one example here, where yes, the labor market jobs are increasing, but not at the rate of the area completers. So I have come up with our job market analysis based on the Bay Area. So I've taken the counties around the Bay Area. And then I look at the job openings and the completers. A completer is anybody who gets a degree from any of the colleges or universities identified in that geographical area. And in this one example, however many job openings there are more than twice as many completers every year to fill those. And then our own program in this area is on a decline of almost 29% or 30%. So, you know, these are the kinds when we're doing program review and we're making plans on how do we respond to the job market. These are kind of the conundrums we face where, well, that looks good, but that doesn't quite look as good, and how are we responding, and what could we do to make our graduates, our completers, more viable than the twice as many that are out there. We know one of the significant gaps we have has to do with equity, and we had a number of strategies that we've recommended in the equity plan based on the things we found. For instance, our African American students, although they are doing about equally as well as the African American students in the Bay 10 colleges, the 21 colleges that make up the 10 districts that surround the Bay Area, they're still performing below our own institutional set standards and are disproportionately impacted, which means they're not performing even 80% as well as the highest performing group that we have. So we know we're going to want to address that. We also know that women are woefully underrepresented on campus in engineering and physics. So that's an access issue, and we need to strategize on how we're going to do that. And then also African Americans and Hispanics are underrepresented in 3 or 4 of the science disciplines, particularly engineering and physics and chemistry and biology. So that's something we have said that we're going to address in the equity plan, and since our planning processes are integrated, we're going to address that in the strategic plan as well. We all know about this one. The Accreditation Association has pointed it out. We've pointed out to ourselves, gosh, I've probably heard it a half a dozen times this week, but we really need to restore our full-time faculty. It seems like we hired a whole bunch of faculty all at the same time, which meant they all kind of retired at the same time, at the time when we either encouraged them to or we had a hiring freeze and we couldn't hire replacements. And then now we've got this big full-time faculty need, which carries with it kind of a big budgetary demand, and we're trying to strategize on ways that we can build up our full-time faculty again. But, you know, when I used to do these reports, we had 151.6 full-time faculty, and our ratio of full-time faculty in the classroom to adjunct faculty in the classroom was at 65-35. Now, adjuncts are teaching more than half of our sections on campus, and doing a good job, Jackie. And our full-time faculty contingent is 115 as opposed to 152. We have plans in the Educational Master Plan on how we're going to build that back. It has become a priority throughout the college, you know, college council, administration, faculty senate. We're all working toward that. But we also know it's going to be a difficult road. But nonetheless, we're going to include in the strategic plan over the next 5 years how we're going to go about doing that. We know that some changes to the curriculum in the high schools is upon us. We don't know how that will change our high school graduates coming to us. We have some ideas, but nonetheless, we need to plan for what those impacts of the Common Core will be if they are realized. We know about the construction challenges. We know for the next 5 years, things are going to be crazy. You know, I talk about the Fremont campus being the donut campus with a great big hole in the middle, and then, you know, we're all arrayed around the periphery. And that causes its own kinds of challenges. We don't know if that'll, you know, somehow be a hindrance to growth as the students come and try, you know, a part of a semester wandering around Fremont campus and decide, this is too confusing, I'm caught inside the green fence, I'm going to go to Chabot. Or, you know, if it will have impact on our morale or our energy levels or our ability to communicate, or, you know, there are going to be impacts because of construction. And we need to plan for that because we know it's going to be going on for the next 5 years. Student and staff satisfaction levels. We completed the student survey and the faculty survey and the staff surveys. We compiled numbers. We're in the process of analyzing them. Some things emerge out of that about, in some areas, declining levels of satisfaction. Those need to be addressed because we want not only this to be, you know, a college that produces effective graduates, you know, that are high achievers, but we also want to promote high morale amongst us and that kind of sense of family and cooperation and collaboration that has kind of been a hallmark of who Ohlone is and has been. And then the impacts of emerging accountability. Like I said, federal rating systems and chancellor's office goals and the prospect of performance-based funding. That's a requirement of the federal rating system that will mandate to the states that the states establish performance-based funding. And the initial metrics on what would constitute performance, as we look those over, we think we're in pretty good shape because it looks at transfers and completions and, you know, it had labor market impact, but I think we'll be doing okay because it's labor market impact based on salaries received after graduation, and we're in a pretty high salaried place. So, you know, we're not anticipating any, you know, particularly ill effects from performance-based funding, but we just don't know how it's going to emerge. And, you know, kind of, you have to plan for the unknown, and that's part of our strategic planning. And accreditation standards are going to have some changes, already have some changes, and we need to address those as well. So we've taken all of those gaps and we've gathered them from the strategic plan, accreditation recommendations, all these kinds of things. All this input from numerous kinds of places have all been kind of melded together, and as a result, we've initially come up with 7 emerging themes. So as we write our strategic plan, here's 7 prospective goals under which we could array large numbers of objectives. So we know, of course, student learning and achievement is always going to be #1 in what we do, and we're going to constantly be working for improvement there. We know that diversity is something that we want to address, whether it be the makeup of the demographics of our students, whether it be responding to and soliciting international students or international programs or study abroad or whatever else. So diversity is going to be one. Employment and career preparation is really an area that we could talk about CTE and labor market and contract ed and community ed and all kinds of ways of addressing this. And perhaps saying one of the new things we might want to do is figure out some kind of way to better prepare our students for careers through teaching of soft skills, because that is always something that comes up, and it was a primary emphasis of that meeting I told you about 2 days ago. Soft skills. In other words, interviewing skills and communication skills, and not just the technical things. You know, let's say we have somebody who gets a degree in computer science, and they are just the world's greatest programmers. But in addition to having those technical skills, they also have to be able to get along and collaborate and do leadership. And those are what soft skills are, and those are constantly brought up by employers. And we are addressing that, but maybe we could do a better way of addressing those kinds of needs. Equity, we've mentioned those. Access refers to both growth, and it refers to the access to enrollment and to programs by groups. So, for instance, if women are underrepresented in engineering, that's an access issue. So we need to address those kind of things. Resources, we always have to plan for physical viability and improved technology, and our human resources needs like professional development, hiring the right people, and how we go about doing that, and serving and our employees. And so that's all under, and resources. Which one did I forget? Facilities. Boy, do we need to plan for facilities in the next 5 years. And then we have a last potential category of institutional improvement, where we can put in things like being compliant with accreditation standards as they change and rating systems as they change, and other ways that we can become uniquely ourselves. We are not going to be satisfied being an excellent cookie-cutter community college where we're doing all the normal things a little bit better than everyone else. We have unique programs. We have a unique identification. There are things that make us us. And we want to be able to address those kinds of things in the institutional improvement. And then we also want to be able to allow ourselves the freedom to innovate and to try things and sometimes succeed and sometimes fail. So, you put in an objective like innovation. We're not sure how you ever statistically measure that, except saying we tried something new and it worked, or we tried something new and it didn't, so we tried something else again. But we want to give ourselves, as a part of our planning, the impetus to do those innovative kinds of things, and to say, not only is this okay, but it's something we expect you to do. So, these may become 7 prospective goals as we meet on April 10th, and we divide everybody up into, well, would you like to talk about student learning and achievement, or would you like to talk about access or equity? And at that point, then all of the participants will then try to take these, or maybe they'll come up with some others, but to take these and come up with a goal and prospective objectives that will then filter down to become a part of the strategic plan. Because when we write a strategic plan, it's not like we write it. It's the college community writes it with us. And so by the time we get down and actually put, pen to paper, we will have found out what our college community and the community at large is saying we ought to be doing, and all we will do is find the words to get that so it's submittable. So here's our task. We have to do all these things, consolidate the goals and look at the gaps and listen to people and revise mission and value and be aware of what's coming down the pike and look at program reviews and what that tells us about ourselves. And eventually, we want to add to that a sense of who we are and what we want to become. And then come up with a strategic plan that'll guide us for the next 5 years. So that's my part of it. You have all been noticeably well behaved and quiet. And I don't know if that's because it either all made sense and you have no questions, or you were off in space somewhere, because back row people have a tendency to do that, But now's the time to see if you have anything that you want to ask, clarifications, comments, additions that could be melded into initial considering for strategic plan. It's your turn now.
Is there any plan to address faculty morale?
We would like to think we're always trying to address that. But if there are concerns, we need to hear those, because, if morale is not good, we need to know why, so that that can become a part of the strategic plan. Usually morale is an outgrowth of something else going wrong or not going on that should be. So we need to hear what's causing declines in morale, if that is the case, so that they can be addressed in the strategic plan. I will say that one thing that does emerge from the surveys that we handed out is we recognize that in some areas there are less levels of satisfaction with things that are going on than there had been 2 years ago. Now, my initial analysis of that is 2 years ago when we did the survey, and the 2 years before that when we did the survey, we were in the midst of the recession and workload reductions and kind of crisis mode, and crises kind of tend to bring families together and make us stronger and closer. And I think that's what happened then, because the levels of satisfaction 2 years ago and 4 years ago were significantly higher than what the levels were in 2008 before we had a recession. And so, yes, we've seen a kind of decline in some satisfaction levels, not just with faculty, but with staff and students as well, but nowhere near the levels that they were in 2008. So it may seem like, okay, things are not as, we're not as satisfied as we were 2 years ago. We just don't feel that way for some reason. But my contention would be there's probably a context for that. We've all banded together for so long, and we've put up with all kinds of things, and now we think, okay, the recession's supposed to be over, let's move ahead with doing, and it just doesn't happen that quickly. But we do need to know if there are concerns.
So will you be addressing that on April 10th?
When we meet on April 10th, we will divide up into 7 different groups, and I don't know which one of those would probably be the best one to address that. Probably institutional improvement, because the institutional improvement topic has to do with kind of the more qualitative sense of things. And so it might be that if you have concerns and you get to be in a group, you go to that one, and then as we're framing objectives and how we write that goal, that's where your input would be most valuable. But yes, we want to address morale problems if they exist.
The other possibility would be the area of resources, because resources is not just money, it's also human resources, and professional development training would fall under there. That might be another avenue for addressing morale issues. I've got a couple of other things I'd just like to add, because they're part of the mix and part of what we need to be considering to get a full picture of what's going on, and partly they have to do with what I see as a shift in the state legislature as and the governor as it pertains to the proposed budget and some of the caveats for the budget. We've seen that there's a lot of one-time money in the budget as opposed to long-term ongoing increases for us. And even the long-term ongoing increases have strings attached. And by strings, I mean for student success and student equity and many of even the career pathways, they are either grants, competitive grants you have to apply for, or they have some outcomes that you have to show in order to get the money, a level of service or a level of change in some way. There's also a tendency to tie the ongoing money to districts that have highest unemployment, the greatest poverty, the highest number of first-generation students. So as we go forward, and Mike has just described, we're not really in those categories. So we need to be thinking about how we're going to address the areas that we can, like student equity, but also how we're going to, what we're going to look like as a college and how we're going to be able to sustain ourselves given one-time money and given money targeting different types of districts from what we are. There are also a number of initiatives out there. There's career pathways that we're participating in. There's adult education and a number of other projects. I think Mike mentioned institutional effectiveness partnerships. So we're involved in all of those, and they have implications perhaps for our goals and objectives as well. Another thing we're starting to do is look across our curriculum to see how our programs are doing as a whole. Our curriculum is performing as a whole, and where we have opportunities for growth and where we have opportunities to make some of our other programs stronger, maybe by revising curriculum or combining programs or doing something innovative that would strengthen a program that isn't performing as well as some of the others. And finally, Mike mentioned construction. Definitely we need to think about construction as we go through it and what the impacts are, and signage and
So for construction, do you mean actual building construction?
Yes.
Okay.
and where our accessibility issues are and our signage and so on. But we also need to be thinking that 2018 is within the 5-year window we're planning for. 2018 is the year that we anticipate the academic core on the Fremont campus will be up and running. We'll have more space for science laboratories and an opportunity to grow there. So that, I think, needs to be part of our 5-year consideration. Those are my thoughts.
Based on our academic performance index, the percentage of graduates who have completed CSU or UC entrance levels. So yeah, they are two that stand out among the 7.
But we get the largest number of our students from
Logan in Union City.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that if persistence is one of the things that we're going to be evaluated on, that we should be really making a clear effort of trying to show like how many of our students are international students who come for just a year and go back home, how many people are in these other programs that you were talking about where they're coming in and completing a certain number of goals for tech or whatever, right, where we know that those students aren't going to persist, you know, because if we're putting them, we have to put them in our total numbers, right? So the sense should be, if people aren't going forward to next year, can we actually identify that we have these big groups of people that we know would never come back? Does that make sense? So instead of just saying that we have the actual, that we know this, right, that we have the numbers that demonstrate that as well. We have X number of students who come into this program, they completed it, they go off to work. X number of students in international ed who do not come back or go to transfer. Another thing to consider is, I notice this because I teach online, that most of our students do not just go to Ohlone, they go to whatever campus fits their schedule and has the class on the day they want to take it. And it seems to me that we really should be starting to collect data on things like that as well. How many students are going to more than one school? I don't know how you get it except for having them self-report. I mean, there was a push several years ago to actually track students through their social security numbers so we could see who was going where and where they went after they graduated. I don't know what happened to that. It's one of those things that was floated when I was Senate president, so that's been a while ago.
Well, the good news is the Chancellor's Office is aware of these kinds of things. And so all of this data is reported. It's a public document. It started off on the accountability reporting in 2007. Now we call it the Student Success Scorecard. But these are all public documents. The ratings are public documents. But the Chancellor's Office has identified peer colleges. That is, we're compared against other colleges that are in the same kind of setting, maybe high consortium enrollments or lots of international students, or they're based on educational achievement of the community, and they're based on socioeconomic, and they're based on the academics performance index of the high schools. And so they arrange us in peer colleges. So, our retention and persistence rates, for instance, are compared to like colleges. We're not being compared to, say, someplace like Butte, where they're the only show in town, and they're not going to choose between us or Mission or Chabot or somebody else right down the street. Certainly they're going to have probably higher persistence rates than we do, because they're not going to be bouncing around. But we can't get this data necessarily for ourselves, but we can get them the Chancellor's Office gets them for us and tries to remove some of these variables and then identifies peer colleges. So at least, as best we can, comparing our persistence rate to like colleges.
We also have insights and opportunities that might not, that are part of the context that Mike was talking about. For instance, if you look at those two high-performing high schools, they may not come to Ohlone for the first 2 years of their four-year degree, but they're very likely to be concurrently enrolled. So we have a large contingency of students who are in high school taking those classes to get college credit because they want to be able to move forward more quickly in their degrees. So that's not altogether bad. I mean, if you look at the whole picture, it helps. Also, we know, I mentioned Logan. Logan has the largest percentage of African American students we get are from Logan, correct? So there's some opportunities as we serve that institution. It's surprising how many students come from that school, and also that district thinks of Ohlone as its school, even though it's really, yeah. So there are opportunities there too.
I wasn't trying to imply that it was good or bad, just that we should capture that data so that...
We're kind of judged on that data, unfortunately. But if we know it, we know where to put our energies. And if it's data that we know what it's about, then why would we correct it? If it's not a problem, then we shouldn't be spending our goals and our energy trying to fix something that isn't broken, even though it may look like it in the data.
Have we exhausted our questions? I think we're through.
Okay, so I want to thank you for coming, but I also want to remind you that we need you to participate on April 10th. Have you been to a summit before? Probably, yeah. Well, it's the same thing. We're going to be doing it again. So there'll be sandwich boards or huddle boards or something that will have goals, our goal topics. Maybe by then the College Council will have fleshed out some sort of goal statement, a draft goal, and then people will go to the area that interests them most and participate in putting together a list of potential objectives. And then we'll move forward from there. I think last time we got over 200 potential objectives, and we had to cull it down to about 48. And when people realized we had 48, they kind of rolled their eyes and said, "Oh my goodness!" But we accomplished almost all of them, so it's not undoable. So please plan to attend on April 10th.